Hi, I'm Piero. I have decided to write down in 2 volumes my philosophy, the foundation of my philosophy, a standard model that I use for analyzing ideas. So it's not going to be all of my ideas. It's going to be this tool set that I call relativistic skepticism. And that'll be the title of it, relativistic skepticism. And I thought I'd present it, some of the work as it's going on. So what I want to do today is describe why it's going to be in 2 volumes, and then go through the titles for the sections for Volume 1. Okay, there's 2 volumes because Volume 1 is going to just contain my ideas, basically undefended. They fit together, and so maybe there's an implicit defense of them because you'll see, oh, this system fits together, ideally. And then Volume 2, though, will describe more of the defense of why I believe what I believe as opposed to something else, my arguments in favor of it, the genealogy of the idea in terms of where some of the ideas came from. Whereas the first volume is just the ideas. They're my ideas, they're presented as my ideas, and turns out they do come from places, but that'll be in Volume 2. So okay, here's the section titles. Probably definitely going to be working on the order of these because I do want them to be from a more fundamental to a higher level. So this is the order right now, and some of these are just as I've typed down the section titles. And in the future maybe I'll read some of the text from some of the sections and look at these things one at a time. Okay, so first, relativity, section on relativity. Basically, there's a lot of ways to express relativity. One of them being that there's just no privileged point of view that is the absolute point of view. Another way is that relativity says you can make concrete statements about relationships, but not about things in themselves. And that is the basis of my relativity. And the section on skepticism, talking about the doubt inherent in knowledge. And how that works. I then present a spatial metaphor for ideas, which is something I've made a video on. There'll be a section on absolutes, and my take on absolutes basically is of course I don't believe in absolutes, and I often use the term smooth to describe how absolutes work. They can be useful. It is useful to say is something smooth or not, or is it smoother than something else, is what you're really saying. Because if you look closely at something, of course, nothing is smooth if you look closely. If you look closely enough, you'll find atoms with big gaps, and it's not even continuous, so even the whole idea and way of measuring smoothness will break down. And be inappropriate, and yet all of the objects around us do consist of atoms. So in a way, the concept of smoothness should apply to nothing, and yet it does. And so I'll talk about absolutes and how to understand absolutes in a relativistic framework. There's a section on reality and sense input. Okay, basically reality is all of the patterns that we've deduced from our sense input. There's some issues there since this is a feedback, because we also judge what is sense input versus what is imagination based on its ability to be consistent and fit into consistent patterns. And as we build up the patterns that we believe in, that we think of as reality, we also apply those to novel new sense input, or perceptions I should say, to determine if they are sense input. There's a section on epistemology and worldview. Epistemology, of course, being theories of knowledge, and worldview. I've just uploaded a video actually where I talk a bit about worldview and my idea of why everybody actually has a philosophy and what philosophy really is in the general sense, as opposed to what philosophy is as an academic discipline. I will talk about the consciousness and the ego, and I will use the spatial metaphor to do that. Extension and intention, I presented this idea before. These are 2 concepts that relate to terms, and they really help when you're working on language. If you're trying to improve language and get a better definition for something, it can be very confusing, and understanding this distinction between extension and intention really helps, because what you can do is you can be working on the intention, the standard definition of something, and when you get rid of that, instead of getting confused about what do you mean, you can rely on the extension. And similarly, it goes the other way around. You can use the intention to pick out objects from the world and fill the set, and then use that extension. And by comparing these things back and forth with reality, you can do well on understanding these arguments that get so confusing and frustrating to people. When we say if something exists, we're asking if the intension really fills the extension with anything. If the extension is empty when using the intention to build the extension, then you have something that is said not to exist, because it exists only as an idea, basically. I think I've said before, I guess I will say, so the intention, just really quickly in a term, the intention is like the dictionary definition, and the extension is all the things that are sort of named by that. So in a coyote, the definition of a coyote is sort of the description that you might have in a dictionary or a field guide of how to recognize a coyote. And the extension is actually all the coyotes in the real world. And in a good definition, the intention would pick out exactly what should go in the extension. It would describe that. So a good intentional definition of a coyote would pick out all the coyotes. And this might seem simple to do, but take, for example, traditionally how you would define a coyote would be morphologically from its form. But if two coyotes breed and have a mutant coyote that's just a ball of fur, is that really a coyote or not? Well, morphologically, it would not be identified as a coyote. But if your intentional definition of a coyote includes genetics, an understanding of genetics, then you would say, well, yes, that's still a coyote, a mutant coyote, but it's still a coyote. So we use extension and intention a lot, or I do in my philosophy. The next section I will do is on what it means to exist. So I've described this many times. I believe existence is a name that we give to the phenomena of our will having experiences. So basically, it's true by definition that I exist. Then things that interact with me exist by virtue of that relationship with me. Things that have interacted with things that interact with me also, exist, but they may not exist. It's a secondary existence. It's the further out you go, the more it is just like hearsay, and you might be hearing about something that doesn't exist, a sea monster that was told to a person, that was told to a person, that was told to me. Now that is a candidate for existence. But on the other hand, often we do believe this kind of secondary and tertiary information. For example, if somebody writes an article on something that's going on in Yugoslavia, I've never been to Yugoslavia. I don't have any first-hand experience with it, but I might give a little bit of trust that that person actually has been. There's a section on natural philosophy. There's a section on enlightenment, which I describe in terms of the spatial metaphor of the mind, because I think that's a really good metaphor for this concept. To me, the process of enlightenment is knowing ourselves better, basically. There are lots of parts of the mind that are invisible to us, that are dark, not in the sense of being negative or evil, but just dark in the sense that they are not lit. But we have the means to go and shine a light on these parts of the brain. Now, through evolution, the parts of the brain that are most visible are those that map to sensory metaphors, because this is what we understand, and we have a model of ourselves that can accept sensory input, even if it's not from the real world. In other words, within dreams. The parts of the mind that are hardest to access are those that do not map as easily into these sense metaphors and space and time metaphors. But we can map. Ultimately, all of the structures of our brain, of course, exist in the real world, according to our theory of objectivity. So I do expect that we can shine a light on all of them. None of them are fully incomprehensible, because all of them have components that we can access in the metaphors of real space and time, because that's what our senses are noticing. I also think that the project could never end, because we're missing senses. There's things we don't sense. There's things we don't comprehend. There's a section on opposition and negation, which is going to be about confusions people have. People think that if you negate something, you can create an opposite, and that's not really the case. If you negate, if you have theism and you negate it, and you have atheism, those are both part of the theistic argument. Things that are opposed, there are no true opposites. There are things, and there's the negation of those things, which yields nothing. And when you have two things that are supposedly opposite, they're never actually opposite. They can only be conceptually opposite. You can set them up oppositionally as concepts, but in reality they won't be opposites. And, is dark the opposite of light? No, it's the absence of light.